Hey guys, welcome back. I just bought a new project vehicle and I figured it would be a good one to take you guys along with some diagnostics and repairs. Customer called. I don't think we've seen this vehicle, but they said, hey, I have a 2006 Subaru Forester that doesn't run. Someone told me it needs an engine. Someone else told me it needs something else. I just want to sell it. And they wanted $300 for it. So I went and bought it. So it's on the wrecker still behind me here. So we will get it off the wrecker and then I'll have to get it flipped around in the shop. Probably get a battery charger or a booster on it. Battery's too dead for me to crank it over. It was barely enough for me to get it into neutral so I could tow it. We'll find out what's going on. I'm hoping it doesn't need an engine, but if it does, paid $300 for it, I can hopefully build an engine, find an engine, or sell it for what I have in it. So I'll get it unloaded, get it flipped around, and we'll start checking it out. Okay, I have the Subaru in the shop. I got it flipped around. I threw the hoist legs underneath it just in case we need to lift it up. And I have a jump pack on it. So let's go ahead and crank it over and see what happens. I'm hoping the engine isn't locked up, because that'll be the most expensive repair, because these blocks aren't too forgiving when it comes to mechanical failure. Okay, it cranks over, but it doesn't sound quite right. Let me put the camera under the hood, make sure you guys can get a sound of that, what's going on, and then we'll come up with a couple tests that we can do to prove what I think is going on. Okay, so to me, it sounds like we have a broken timing belt. This is a 2.5 liter single overhead cam engine. Still has the timing belt set up. Not quite new enough for the chain, but it sounds like a typical broken timing belt. Now, there's a couple of tests that we could do, but honestly, my first go-to test on the Subaru is a visual inspection. It's by far the fastest and easiest way to check it. Yeah, we could pull all the spark plugs out and check compression. It sounds like there's compression in one hole, but that's more work than what we need to do. So on a Subaru, the main timing cover is one large piece, except for this cam cover over, or this cylinder head over here. That timing cover is a small piece. There's only 3 bolts that hold it on. The coolant reservoir is kind of in the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the coolant reservoir off. We'll take the 3 bolts out of that. They're 10mm headed bolts. Same with the coolant reservoir. We'll pop that out and just take a quick look at the belt and see if it's broken, if it's spinning, what's going on. Now, also what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a parts bucket, which I need to mop up the coolant in there, because I have a feeling we're going to be digging this thing apart pretty deep. So let's clean that out. Now we have a place to throw our hardware. I'm just going to pull this hose out. Well, maybe we'll leave that in, take it off the radiator. So 2 bolts here. Now we can see the timing cover. If we wanted to, we could pull the fans out of the way, but actually this one's a little more difficult. I'm used to the 2 separate fans. This is a full integrated unit. So I don't know if it has retaining bolts on the bottom or not. So we'll just sneak the cover out of there. So the one on the top's easy, and then there's 2 on the bottom. Timing cover slides forward and pops off. Snake it out of there like so. The belt appears to be intact, but actually can't really see it well. Some of the teeth are missing. So let me crank it over and we'll see if the engine actually cranks over or the camshafts turn over with the crankshaft. We can definitely hear something's going on. I'm just going to wipe this off and put a mark on there since I won't be able to see what's going on. Okay, my mark did not move. Engine cranked over, mark didn't move. The belt has stripped teeth. It's got to come apart. That's all there is to it. Okay, so the belt's not spinning. This is an interference engine, which means there is a very high likelihood that the valves have come in contact with the pistons. More than likely, these cylinder heads are coming off. What we can do is pull the rest of the timing belt down, line up the marks, maybe put the new belt on, and see if we have compression, see if it runs. But I don't have high hopes for it. So I think what we'll do, let's make a quick decision here and let's lift it up in the air, see if the head gaskets are leaking oil. Because if they're leaking oil, I'm pulling the head gaskets anyways, because I don't like leaking vehicles, and it'll be easier for me to sell if it has new head gaskets. So if I'm gonna do head gaskets anyways, there's no point in wasting our time with the timing belt. So let's get it in the air, take a quick look. Okay, to get a better view, can't really see a whole lot with a skid plate on. We're gonna pull this off. There's some push pins around the outside and a couple of 12mm headed bolts here and a couple back there. Now, I've had a lot of these apart. I don't sort my bolts. So if you're copying my steps and you don't know where stuff goes, it may be a good idea to start marking stuff now. These bolts have a little shoulder on them so they don't crush the plastic skid plate. And we got lots of spider webs, so hopefully no creepy crawlies come out of there and try to bite us. I'm not exactly sure how long the vehicle had been sitting. They told me they loaned it to a friend and the vehicle died while their friend was driving it. So they didn't really know what happened. The friend had taken it to a shop and told them that it needed an engine. They called another shop and they quoted them something else without looking at it, so they weren't quite sure. But they realized that they didn't want to put the money into it. I would have been happy taking, 4 more bolts out. Okay. Oh, in the back here, the skid plate kind of just has these 2 hooks, goes around the cradle. Let's see what we have. Well, it's not looking good. So last service done was probably done at Subaru. It looks like a Subaru oil filter. Oil cooler looks like it's leaking a little bit. The coolant hose that supplies coolant to the oil filter, or to the oil cooler, looks terrible. It's all swelled up with oil. But if we look right here, let me get my light situated. Hopefully we can see that without glaring too much. Right in here is where I look on both sides of the engine. That's where the head gasket's at. So we see, not sure if it's coming up, but I see kind of a silvery gray discoloration there, and it's very wet. Well, it's because oil's been leaking out of there. It's been moving up and down on that head gasket, leaking quite a bit. So no matter what, I'm going to be pulling these heads for the head gasket repair. So I think we should probably just go ahead and do that, not waste too much time inspecting our valves. I got to send the heads out to a machine shop. If it needs valves, we'll do valves. Okay, I do a lot of these Subaru head gaskets. I can do them very quickly. I'm not bragging, it comes with experience. I normally do them in the vehicle. The Foresters are a little tougher because the engine sets down in there a little further. It's harder to work on. And a lot of people have a hard time working on them in the vehicle. So for purposes of the video, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this engine. Honestly, it's like 10 more bolts to pull the engine out. I already have I'll have all the electrical unhooked. I'll have the exhaust out of the way. So it's not a big deal to go ahead and pull the engine as long as you have an engine stand that you can put the engine on to work on it. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. While we're underneath the vehicle, I'm gonna unhook everything that I can so we can lift the engine out the top and we shouldn't have to come back down underneath here. So first thing I'm gonna do is drop the exhaust down. I'll switch the camera angle a little bit, but there are 3 nuts on both sides that we're going to take off. I am going to take the exhaust loose from a support further back so we can hang the exhaust down a little bit. And then we'll unbolt the motor mounts, and then we'll get the bottom bell housing bolts. Sometimes, this one should have 8 bell housing bolts. Sometimes they only have 4, but this one's new enough, it probably has 8. We're gonna multitask a little bit and drain the oil out. Subarus drain out very quickly. They have a very large drain plug. I'll probably leave the filter on it, but we'll at least get the oil out of the oil pan. So when we throw it on the engine stand, if we have to maneuver it around a little bit, we're not going to make a mess before we get the chance to drain it. I don't see any metallics in the oil. I don't see any antifreeze. So I don't have too much concern or worry for bottom end damage. It is somewhat common for the piston rings to stick, and they use a little bit of oil. That oil was dirty, not excessively, and it seemed like about 4 quarts of oil, so I'm not too concerned about it burning oil, especially how long this filter's been on there. If it was burning oil, it probably would have had a lot less oil in it. Okay, drain plug out of the way. We are going to be working with 14mm headed hardware. So I'm just going to grab my impact, make a little bit of noise. Now you normally don't have to worry too much on these being rusted in, because if they do rust the head of the bolt, normally the whole stud comes out and you're still good to go. Okay, there's one bolt way back here. Take that loose, and then if I want to drop the exhaust all the way down off the engine, I have to lift up on the exhaust and push on that bracket. But since we're pulling the engine out, I don't think we have to. It should hang low enough that the engine will clear it. Now we have a motor mount nut on each side. We should be able to sort of see it there. So I take the exhaust loose first because you have to kind of reposition the exhaust out of the way slightly. And the nut is right up here on my finger. Our battery's getting low. We'll just break it loose real quick with the wrench. Maybe. I'm going to go ahead and get the other one as well, and then I'll zip them out with the impact. That stuff's done. We're going to flip around to the back side of the engine and look at the bell housing stuff. Okay, so we're going to kind of look through the axle shaft and the other assorted lines over here. We have a nut down here. There's a bolt right above it that's blocked by the axle. There's a bolt up top, which we can't get out until we unbolt the starter. So I'll probably get that one from the top after I loosen up the starter and get it out of the way. But we'll go ahead and zap all these lower ones loose. I'll slap a new battery on the impact, and hopefully a wobble will take those out. Now there is a small washer behind all of these nuts. There's just the nut on the one lower starter bolt and the 2 lower bell housing bolts. So you should end up with 3 of these smaller 10mm washers. I got to get that one bolt out behind the axle. I'll have to move the camera for that one, but keep in mind that there's one behind there. If you're working on an older one, they normally don't have this extra bolt behind the axle or the one behind the starter. It's just 2 on the bottom, 2 on top. So they're a little easier to manage. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the other bolts on the other side. And then we'll carry on. Okay, I went ahead and pulled off the bell housing bolts on this side. I was able to get to all 4 of them on this side, the nut at the bottom, and then the 3 bolts. I did drop the exhaust down. I want to mention, if you're dropping the exhaust down the rest of the way, or I just lifted it off the bracket, let it hang out of my way a little bit, you have to watch the oxygen sensor wires. You don't want to let it hang too far because it'll pull on those wires and either pull them out of the sensor or out of the connector, and you don't want to have to buy a new sensor. So watch the wires. There's a few things left on the bottom on the radiator, and then we'll drop it down. Okay, I'm not going to drain the coolant out quite yet. I normally do it very quickly by pulling the thermostat housing, but I'll obviously have to move you guys out of the way or I'll flood you. But we need to unclip a lot of these other lines from the radiator. These are transmission cooler lines. If you have a manual transmission, you don't have those, so don't worry about it. We have one or two, yeah, we have two connectors for the cooling fans. See, the clip is on the forward facing side, so those unplug. The other one comes off the side of the fan over there. Okay, so here's the other one. Make sure you plug those back in when you're done, otherwise you'll burn up your new head gaskets. Okay, so the transmission cooler lines, you have two options. You can unhook the lines from the frame rail over here, or you can unhook them from the radiator. I typically unhook them from the radiator because I can crimp off the lines and keep the fluid from leaking. Now, they are retained into just some plastic clips on the cooling fan shroud. So pull those away. I'm gonna use some little screw-on clamps here to pinch off the line or the hose. And that'll keep it from dumping all the training fluid everywhere. We'll leak a little bit, but this will keep it minimal. If you don't have a set of these already, I'll put a link down in the description. Guys use them for all kinds of stuff. Coolant hoses, brake lines, transmission lines. 90% of my use is on Subaru head gasket jobs for doing this exact purpose. Okay, now these clamps are kind of strange. If you haven't worked on a Japanese vehicle before, let me zoom you in and I'll give you the details. Okay, so we have a little bolt with a metal bracket and kind of a wire clamp. If you loosen it up all the way, sometimes this metal thing comes out of there and you can take it off. Watch the pieces, sometimes they fall apart. A lot of guys take them off and replace them with normal clamps, but I think that these clamps are less prone to leak. So just kind of look at it when you're taking it apart so you can get it put back together the same way. See, right there, it came apart. And so there's this little plate with the threads in it. There's this little tiny washer on the end, and it comes off as well, so don't lose that. Okay, I'm gonna move the camera out of the way before I pop those loose because we will leak some ATF. I wanna make sure I get a drain bucket underneath, and then I'll get a coolant bucket under here. We'll take loose our thermostat. Line is a little stuck on there. Give it a little persuasion. And drain it. By the looks of it, we're going to need to do a transmission service on this thing once we get it up and running. If you have it, grab a little rubber plug, stick it over the port on the transmission. It'll make less of a mess that way. Because moving my drain pan over to the other side, we're gonna unhook this other hose, plug off that port as well. Now our transmission cooler lines should be good to go. Now, I'm gonna route them over the other side of this radiator hose. I know you guys can't exactly see what I'm doing, but that way I can drop them out the side, out of my way, because I'm gonna switch this drain pan for another one, just like it, that we use for antifreeze. Yeah, you're gonna make a really big mess really quick. I may have to clean the camera off. Now, I did not pull the radiator cap off. I probably should have, but when I drop this down, it's gonna leak a lot out really fast. So currently we are only draining the radiator. The small stream coming out the thermostat is draining the block. Yeah, I know the Subarus have a drain on the block. It's just that they are very difficult to get out. And not everyone has a 14 millimeter, or is that a 17? A giant Allen wrench. Especially half-inch drive where you can put a big breaker bar on there. Okay, now we're gonna pop the thermostat out. Sometimes that thermostat comes out with the housing. This one, the hose is kind of holding it in there, so, or the O-ring. I'm gonna pop it out. And there goes the rest of our coolant. My anti-splash pad's missing, so hopefully none got on the camera. Get the rest of the radiator antifreeze out. And I'm just gonna leave the hose attached to the radiator. Unless you're replacing the radiator, there's no sense, or the hoses, there's no sense in doing extra work. That's the easiest place to unhook it from, and then I don't have to worry about loosening up the clamps on the hose. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. In the next episode, we're gonna be working on the top of the vehicle. So if you guys are going through this process yourself, make sure to look for that video. If you guys have any questions or comments, put those down below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.